Hi, everyone, and welcome to another SiteBuild webinar. Today, we're talking SEO on publishing sites, what impact AI might be having on traffic, if any. I'm Patrick, CEO and co-founder of SiteBulb, and I'll be your host. Our guests on the panel today are Jessie Willms from The Guardian US and Harry Clarkson-Bennett from The Telegraph. Please give them a warm welcome in the chat and tell us where you're joining from. So, a little bit of housekeeping before we start. Every single webinar we do, without fail, we get this question. So, I'll answer it up front. Yes, we are recording the session, and anyone who signed up will get the recording emailed to them tomorrow. And we want your questions. So, we'll save 15 minutes or so at the end of the discussion for your Q&A. Please put the questions in the Q&A box alongside the chat, not in the chat itself. And you can also upvote other people's questions if you see something in there that you want answered. So we don't always get a chance to get to every single question, but we will start with the ones that have the most upvotes. So democracy and all that. So before I introduce our guests, let me very quickly introduce SiteBulb. We do website crawling, helping in-house and agency teams get to grips with technical SEO. And we've been dealing with more publishing sites, which are typically pretty big since we launched SiteBulb Cloud, which can now handle websites with tens of millions of pages. So if you're watching this and thinking that you haven't reviewed your cloud crawler for a while, now might be the time to revisit it. So anyway, enough about us. Let's introduce our wonderful guests, who are both extremely active in the publishing SEO community. Jessie Willms is SEO editor for The Guardian US and co-founder of WTF is SEO, a newsletter about search strategy for publishers. I will put the link in a second. Harry Clarkson-Bennett is SEO director at The Telegraph, and he also has a newsletter called Leadership in SEO and writes a column for Search Engine Journal. So go ahead and sign up for their newsletters and follow them on LinkedIn if you care about any of this stuff. They are both excellent follows. So welcome to you both, and thanks for joining us today.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
Jessie's already put the links in for us. Amazing. Okay, cool. So let's get to questions.
Oh, wow, you plug mine as well, Jessie. That's nice.
I know.
It's great. I read it every week. What are you talking about? Why wouldn't I?
No. I thought you were just plugging yours, and I was like, fair play.
I'm surprised Barry hasn't put his in as well. That's weird. Right. So, I'm really keen to hear from you both on this one. But Harry, you kick us off, please. So, if you had to name the single biggest threat to publisher traffic in 2026, and AI wasn't allowed to be the answer, what would you say?
I think that audiences, particularly younger audiences, have been turning off the traditional publishing offering for a while, and I think that's been a slow creep from what's been happening. And I think generally what publishers have done is follow money and follow clicks, which has led them to search. And that's meant that a lot of people have made decisions that maybe are not the best long-term thing for their brand, which is very understandable. But I think that pretty much younger audiences particularly just have options that they would rather do other things. They'd rather spend time on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram. Substack obviously is something that's flying at the minute. People care about people. So I think what you could call something like the reverse halo effect of, it used to be that you would be a journalist who'd work for a big brand, and that would be great for your credibility. But now it's kind of like the inverse is true in lots of cases, and actually big brands are the types that now need to work with and leverage the trust that individuals and creators build with their own audiences.
So, have you got a single biggest threat then? Because you just named loads of stuff.
Yeah, I think it's that audiences are turning off the publisher offering and they're going elsewhere.
Cool.
Which I bundled a few things together, I agree.
Yeah. Jessie?
Hey, well, the bundle is a solution, isn't it? I would agree with Harry. I think fatigue and fragmentation are, not to give two answers when the question was one, but I think the fatigue of news is a threat to publishers. Like there's just so much, obviously I live in Canada, but I work for an American publication. And so there's just a daily onslaught of headlines that don't make you feel great about the world. And so I think that, sometimes what you see happen is it's not that people are then digging into the alternative headlines that we do run and have lifestyle content and have sports content. Sometimes what happens is people just step back entirely if what they see at the top of the homepage of a website day in, day out is just an onslaught of headlines that are not particularly rosy and don't reflect any, like, there's no positive momentum in the news. I think that sort of fatigue just means that a lot of people are just going to opt out entirely and not even dig deeper for the sort of lifestyle and alternative, music criticism, books, et cetera, if it's not presented to them at the top of a homepage. I think the fatigue is real and people are just going to opt out of news entirely. And then also, like, I think the second point is a little bit related to this, which Harry also alluded to, which is fragmentation, that our attention is not going to publishers anymore. It's going in a million different places. And what we're sort of having to do is eke out little pockets of audience and little pockets of getting people to engage with our content and our journalism. Like, publishers who see massive declines in search traffic are saying, okay, well, now what do we do? What do we invest in? And sort of what you're doing is then fighting a million uphill battles to find and grow an audience on TikTok, on Instagram, on a off-platform newsletter that is your content but hosted on Substack, or getting to the top of the podcast charts and Spotify. So I think it's the 1-2 punch of people are turning away from news, they're finding it elsewhere. But then also, like, when publishers do that elsewhere work, it is a little bit of an uphill battle to like get your foothold in those places where maybe people also still don't want your content because you're a big brand and your publisher, and what they actually want is a creator. And because it's a creator, they're a startup and their costs are lower. Like, it's less expensive to be one person making cooking content than to be a cooking studio with different standards and rigors and editorial processes in place.
Okay, so if AI was allowed in that answer, would you have been saying it anyway, or just not?
I think so. I like AI overviews, encroaching on search results, taking up that traffic, taking up more and more of the search results. Like, the fact that even sometimes when I'm doing a site search, like cite theguardian.com, and I put in a keyword to look for content, I'm getting an AI overview of my own content, is very odd and weird. And the way that Google is putting AI summaries in more and more places in search results, like, it used to be that AIO at the top of the search result that you could scroll past, but now it's in people also ask where it is or it was. And like the visibility, like the places where publishers can rank on search because of AI overviews, is getting narrower and narrower, and it's getting more and more bleak because of that AI summary. But Harry, do you want to jump in?
It's definitely still an issue, but kind of zero click marketing, if you want to use that phrase, has been happening for some time, right? So I suppose what AI has done is organized the web in a different manner and made it so that people don't have to click to find an answer, which is obviously pretty problematic for businesses whose business models revolve around a click. So if you're not a publisher, it might be a good thing. If you are a publisher, it's pretty difficult, unfortunately. And I think the fact that these guys are so careless and voracious with their crawling and their inability to strike deals with publishers in lots of cases, which I think is a massive shame because it degrades the product for everybody. It degrades it for publishers because you don't get money, and everything that you do, Google's has tried to enforce some stricter content standards, like them or not, and that's made content more expensive to produce. So now we're having to spend more money to create stuff that will do well. Fine, but now the reward we get back is less, and now it's even less. So every year it goes down. So I think that's the real problem with this, is like the economics of it, because lots of businesses can still survive without a sort of first or second stage click. But unfortunately, the publisher business model is kind of in a period of flux at the minute, where we try to figure out how to do this. And I think that's, unfortunately, it's going to be a difficult few years for lots of businesses, and we'll have to try and be pretty canny. And I think you see like the commercial departments and lots of companies really struggling, affiliates struggling, advertising struggling. All the standard stuff is becoming more and more challenging.
Yeah, but has the AI conversation made it harder or easier to have like strategic conversations inside your organizations? Jessie, you're nodding. Go ahead.
Well, I would say, like, I know Barry is in the chat and has published a great Google Zero is a Lie piece that I'll link now. But I do think, like, the threat of it and the worry of it and the fact that you're seeing arrows pointing in the wrong direction week over week, and like, I think that sort of forces you to get realistic about what is the value of that traffic. And then also, if that traffic disappears entirely, overnight or as the process is slow decline, how do you make up that audience, not only from like a reach perspective in terms of like if you are monetizing page views, which every publisher does, or most every publisher does, if those page views and that monetization goes away, like how much of a hole in your budget is there? But then also the second piece of like, if people aren't clicking links, like how do you actually reach human readers, and how do you show up in their lives and create meaningful value that will create that incentive that they have to support you in some sort of way, whether that's subscribing to newsletters, to adding you as a preferred source, to download your podcast, to actually giving you financial contributions every month, or subscribing on a paywall. I think it definitely, for many organizations, that if it hasn't, it should prompt those slightly harder conversations to have about what is the thing that we're doing that's most valuable, that people actively seek us out for, and how can we better show up in people's lives in order to earn their support.
You see the same.
I think that's kind of perfect. It's definitely taken the shine off search, and that's and I'm sure I'm not the only business person, publisher, agency who has seen similar things, where in lots of cases it's been more difficult to either get things pushed through, or your influence has waned, and you're just not privy to all the conversations that happen, particularly editorially, and neither should we be in lots of cases. Like, our job is not to lead the paper editorially. Like, we are not the best people to do that. But what we should be the best people at is to generate the most value possible out of the content that gets created. So you still need to be brought in at the right time, and you still need a good structure and approach. And like, AI really shouldn't change any of that. I think it's made things, like you said, you have to work harder for a click. You have to work harder for, maybe working harder is the wrong, maybe we just haven't worked out what the best approach is of doing this yet. And I think that's probably true for everybody. And I'm sure we'll come on to this, but like, the metrics that we track and how we try and show value will have to change, because even selfishly, like, do any of us want to be tied to, metrics that are just guaranteed to go down sort of year after year? Is like, I think it would be sensible for us as an industry to try and steer the conversation into something a bit more fruitful for businesses and for us, frankly.
And like, as it's interesting, like I was an audience editor then, because I was doing so much SEO, I wanted to be specifically an SEO and audience editor. And now it's sort of swung back to where I'm looking and thinking, a lot of SEO work is search engine optimization, but it's also search everywhere optimization. And in order to succeed long term, we sort of need to be in more places, which is then the work of an audience editor. So I think that that it's this interesting thing of like, SEO has always been within the broader context of audience, and going forward it might be that you're the 80-20 balance of how much SEO work you do versus audience work, that sort of shifts, and like you're taking just a more holistic approach and understanding of what it means to be an SEO editor. Maybe like in the future we're not search engine optimization experts, but we're search everywhere optimization experts, and thinking about that in terms of like, well, what are people looking for on Instagram and TikTok, and how do we make sure that our content shows up for them? It's that same sort of instinct and that impulse and that behavioral aspect of SEO that I think is honestly, for me, the fun stuff. So
yeah, just across different surfaces as well. Okay, so this next question now, I appreciate you might not be able to share everything here, so just use your discretion. So when you look at actual traffic data across the last couple of years, what changes in audience behavior are you seeing across the website? Like, are you seeing erosion in particular types of content?
So I think there's a fair few third-party things out here at the minute that I think are pretty accurate, right? And I think in lots of cases, direct traffic has suffered for quite a few brands. I'll be pretty generic here, but like, direct traffic to a lot of brands over the last few years has suffered. I think affiliate content generally is way harder than it was. And I think that's a real challenge, because that was obviously a really lucrative business line. Obviously, anything that doesn't fit fairly tightly into what your brand is. If you're a big publisher, I think maybe a big part of the problem maybe Google has had, and big publishers have done very well out of, is like, if you are Guardian, the Telegraph, BBC, you can kind of rank for and do anything, or at least you could a few years ago. And I think that's kind of waned for everybody in lots of cases, and that they've done manual actions for parasite SEO, because they obviously couldn't figure out a good way of post a helpful content update, which was a bit of a disaster for well, everybody. They obviously couldn't find a good way of doing this algorithmically, and I think it's pretty unlikely that they wanted to run that risk again. So they went pretty heavy-handed with manual actions, just across the board. That kind of what we, I suppose, now call like commodity content, standard evergreen stuff. If you're creating anything that you're creating just with SEO in mind, I think is, if that's your only reason for doing it, it's probably a bad idea. I think you could kill that and just say we're not doing this anymore, and you'd probably be better off as a business.
Yeah, I think Harry's point about just taking a scalpel to your content is a useful lesson that this sort of change has taught us, that like, big publishers could kind of write and rank on anything, even without earning that visibility or earning that right to have access to audience on these particular topics. So I think staying in your lane a little bit more is a good thought experiment of like, okay, what do we actually have topic authority and what do we actually demonstrate really great EAT on? What are our authors actually most passionate about and most well versed in? And then making sure that that is those are the sort of core pillars. And then, like Harry said, doing away with those one-off commodity pieces that aren't relevant to your overall expertise.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. So maybe I'll come back to a couple of those things in a minute. I just also wanted to look at, guess you sort of mentioned it there, Harry, about the sort of lack of direct traffic. There was some research published recently through Reuters Institute showing under 35 mostly encounter news incidentally, so through feeds rather than through search or direct navigation. I'll put the link in, but what do you make of that as a concept? Do you agree, I suppose?
Yeah, like spot on, right? I think this is exactly, all of this stuff ties together. Of the last few years, we've seen most people have seen a degradation of search. I'm pretty confident that if we look into that in more detail, most of that is from younger audiences. I'm pretty confident a part of that is not only did they not seek out publishers as much as they did, they don't use search as much as older generations did because they have more options and they discover things algorithmically, right? So what we have got pretty used to and what most people do is in the kind of click-based attribution, it's like it's last click wins. That is a lot of the time they search, and that's great for us, but it's pretty shitty for your actual business and your actual way of thinking about where you generate customers from and where you generate value from. So 100%, I think that's absolutely right. I think people use Google less, younger audiences, they literally just discover everything passively, and then they might check your website out if they see something they like, or like Jessie said, from somebody they like, they'll come back to that. So I think all of this is pretty interconnected. And like I said earlier, like the options people have, younger audiences are different, and like Google's not cool. It just isn't. And they have other, it's like, to us it is, but it's not. It's like there's just more, there's easier ways or more interesting ways that they can find out what they want to find out, and then they might use Google afterwards.
Yeah. TikTok's cool, right? I think.
Yeah. And it is like, it's interesting too, because
Allegedly.
Allegedly, yeah. The main difference though between these two things is like active versus passive. If you're on TikTok, like you're making decisions about who you follow for sure, but like so much of the scroll behavior, I mean, they call it doom scrolling for a reason. You're not actually locked in, you're not actually engaged, you're just coming up with whatever comes in your content, in your feed, I should say, whatever content you're engaging with, whatever content comes into your feed, and you make some decisions about who you follow and the algorithm learns from that, but you're not actively seeking out new information. I think like obviously like it's worrying on a number of levels. Like what happens if people are only ever active, like passively getting news information, like just the local meat and potatoes, local politics, like what's happening in your area, that kind of stuff is worrying and upsetting because people are just going to have these huge information gaps. But then also I think that behavior of active versus passive, and I think some of it too is like, I think a little bit is as you get a little bit older, you do tend to need the news a little bit more. Like you need to know how to save adequately so you can invest in a mortgage. So you can get a mortgage, so you can buy a house, so you can like save for retirement. I'm using financial examples, but like I do think there's a little bit of like you kind of like perhaps you age into a little bit of that search behavior. And so the question I think is just like, are these younger audiences going to exclusively do that searching on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, or will they, as they get older, use search a little bit? But like to Harry's point, like Google isn't cool. And if you're trained to always just be in that passive, I get the information that comes to me mode. Like, is there a switch that's going to flip and suddenly you're actively searching and you've got that really high intent? I don't know. I think probably it's unrealistic to hope for that, but I'm going to kind of hope for that.
Yeah, the active versus passive is the worrying one, isn't it? Because it can lead to manipulation, algorithmic or otherwise, in terms of where you get the source of the news, because you're not choosing it, right? So I mean, are we just
which is to
seeing?
be
Go
fair,
ahead.
which is to be fair, one like a couple of the interesting things is that I found. I think it's from that report. It might also be from there are a couple that came out around that time, but it was around how the length of time. So I think it's like over 55s use news websites nearly 20 minutes a day on average.
Yeah.
And then the under 25s use it for like 4 minutes a day. But there's obviously a difference in how they're using the websites and what they're using them for. It's like the older audiences are just like, I'm going to read the paper, but the younger audiences are like, I want to check some nonsense that somebody said. Is that true? I'm going to go to a reputable source. So there's still like the trust element is still there in some capacity. So I think a lot of what we have to figure out is like how we can. I was going to say weaponize it. I don't mean weaponize trust. I mean it in a good way. But there's still an advantage there for news brands, but I think it's just harder. I think there's just more competition.
Yeah, and like whether or not younger people even want to read at all.
Can they read? You know.
So Harry, earlier, one of your early answers, you mentioned about evergreen content, kind of like as a dying SEO play, I suppose. Like for a long time, that's kind of publishing SEO was about pairing the evergreen content with the breaking and new news. Is this no longer the case?
I think it's definitely less valuable, and I think again all of this pretty much comes back to like, are we driving value for the business here? Maybe it used to be well, it wasn't that difficult, right? Beforehand to be like, here's the search ecosystem, here's how many monthly searches there are, here's the rough click-through rate that we're going to get from this. Well, you can kind of map out how much value. It's not that difficult to do it for affiliate content or subscriptions. You can sort of broadly map how much value you think you're going to get from this stuff. That's much harder to do, and it's much harder to do because it's much harder to do because who knows, and it's much harder to do because it just generates less value. So I think you just have to be more wary with what you do, because obviously everyone wants their content to be fresh and up to date, and that's great, but that's not free. That costs money and time to do. So the more we have, the more you have to think about maintaining it, and people are really difficult at publishers and places where you don't control things to be able to prune content or trim content or be like, is this really the right idea? So you don't have the control that you have on other websites in other areas. And I think that's a real challenge. So I think the kind of commodity side of things, if broad rules of thumb from my end is like, if the content has been done to death and you can't add anything new to it, don't do it. If you're only doing it for SEO purposes because you've seen it has the keyword of 50,000 searches a month, don't do it. It just won't end well for you. And you better your audience better want it. You better have something new to add to what's already out there. And again, that comes back to the cost of creating this stuff. It's more expensive and you get less back from it. So you got to be really wary with what you're doing, because, for us big publishers, you normally have access to big audiences or data or subscriber bases or research teams, and you can pull stuff together that will make your content stand out and be interesting. But again, it just takes time and effort, and it has to be worthwhile.
And I think that sort of speaks to the idea of like, if you're going to do evergreen, one, it like Harry said, it's got to be something your audience wants. And then two, I think it's also like you should really have a plan for it and around it. Like, what is the update strategy for 3, 6, 9, 12 months from now? And if you don't have an update strategy for it in 12 months, that is perhaps an indication that this is something that you actually don't want to invest in. But I also think like within the structure of the page, you should also be thinking about like to Harry's point, like how do you make the page and how do you make the piece exceptional? Does that mean that you should have, like a table with original data in it that you can then clip for a post on Instagram? Or do you have, experts who you can interview and clip for Instagram videos or TikToks, or use that as a part of a podcast like episode or something? So thinking about content that in a more holistic piece where it's like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you could write, what is magnesium? Why do you need it? And just have that piece of content live on your website and bring in traffic every month. But now maybe you need to think about like what are the more specific ways of like magnesium for anxiety, because there was a TikTok trend. And so you can sort of like piece out little parts of it that are useful for other parts of your audience. Like to Harry's point, this is all one of those things where it's like, you got to do more and get less back. But that kind of just feels like the reality. So I would say, like, if you're going to do evergreen, like Harry said, make sure that it's really something that people want, and then also put an audience plan around your SEO effort. So you're thinking about like what parts of this piece can be used on other platforms. And then also like, can I use this as a launching off point to bring people in? So maybe you do an evergreen piece and you have a call out at the bottom for questions that you then fold back into the piece, or you do an AMA on site or on Reddit that answers around that particular topic. So you're sort of trying to like demonstrate your broad expertise on this topic by doing more things with that one piece of content or that one, research effort. I would say, but also like to Harry's point, being realistic about the fact that you might do all this and still get less back than you did 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's like set and forget it's just gone. Like you have to, if it's going to be evergreen, you have to make sure that it's evergreen by constantly watering it. To the grass analogy, if that's where it came from. All right. Anyway, moving on. So Jessie, like I've seen you describing like loyalty as the long-term path for publishers. So what does building that look like for an SEO team, and how would you know that it's actually working?
Yeah, I mean, I would start by like thinking about what are signals of audience loyalty. So, for example, if in Google Search Console you see you see consistently that like a particular search term, like when I was at the Globe and Mail, we would always have lots of consistent interest in like TSX news, so stock market news. That was pretty consistent every day, that brought people to our site, and that's a good habit. There was a couple times where we saw a particular author was being searched consistently because they had a weekly or bi-weekly column, and so that sort of like that was a good pathway between readers and publication, which is like, oh, we know that Rob Carrick is publishing, and I want to know what Rob Carrick's latest is. So I was searching for that author. So authors and topics are a good place to start. Plus also like any branded query that includes a search term. So like Guardian Trump would be an example, or Globe Investor, like or Globe Investing is an example of like that's brand plus topic. So people want investing news from the Globe and Mail. So I would look for those three things to sort of get an understanding of like, what are people already associating with your brand? And then looking at one, like what is the experience? Like actually go incognito and Google those terms and see like, do you get a good landing page for that result? Like, is it a good experience? Like if someone searches horoscopes today and they have to click through 1 million ads and pop-ups in order to get this one piece of content that is going to take them 12 seconds to read, is that a good experience? And are you over monetizing that page view? Whereas like if you search Rob Carrick and you get a really nice author page that makes it really clear what his expertise is and his latest post is, plus the newsletter that he writes or the podcast that he listens to, making that all really easy and accessible for readers, that's a much better experience. I would start maybe there as sort of 3 easy things of like, if you see X in your internal analytics, what can you do with it? Might be a good one. And then, sorry, what was the second half of your question? Go ahead. Go ahead. Sorry, Harry.
No, I was only when you're finished.
Yeah, well, it was, what does it look like and how do you know it's working? Which I feel like you've.
Yeah. How do you know it's working? I think maybe Harry can talk to metrics of like, what does success actually look like? Because I think loyalty is kind of tricky. But like, it would be, I think, is your branded search rising, falling, staying the same? That's a good indication of loyalty. Like, are people who come into your site from search, do they have higher page views per session than other referral sources, et cetera, et cetera? Like those are easy things to look at and measure. And then, yeah, I would also, this isn't an answer to your question, but I would just say like another thing to always be thinking about in terms of all audience loyalty is like, you can actually talk to your audience. You can do surveys, you can do call-outs, you can do questionnaires to say like, this is an SEO thing, this is an audience thing. But like, if you actually ask your readers, hey, what do you value most about our website? They can tell you and give you those signals in those directions. I would also say like, sometimes there's a little bit of difference between what people say they want and what they actually read. So like, check the data and don't take any data from your audience as like a strategy overhaul. But it is a good thing to do and make a part of your overall audience practice.
Awesome.
So
So
really nice, difficult to follow as well.
yeah, Harry. So Jessie was just sort of setting you up there to talk about metrics. So have you got thoughts on that?
Yes. I think super well described on branded search and topics. Like you need people to be searching for your brand. You want to see that stuff going up over time. You want to know that you're building, particularly if you work for big brands within brands, and that you work with authors that people care about. And if you do, then prioritize them and make sure they're easy to find. You said that the experience when people come to the site to find them, and again, less of an SEO thing, but just like if you know, the more you know about your audience, the better. And I think this is where it comes into the loyalty aspect of like, if you're a subscription business, for your loyalty is different to a non-subscription business, and it's more important. And how we know things are going in the right direction is that people are spending more money and sticking around for longer with their subscriptions, which like in SEO, we are not the people who are going to be able to get you to stick around forever. That really is a much bigger undertaking. So I think from our end, it's like nuts and bolts of, are we getting the right people in? We know that by subscriptions, the kind of average spend per customer per year or in total at the lifetime customer value, it's always a really good one. If we're seeing that through search go up, that's great. But once we get people through the door, like we can't, it's very difficult for us to be able to keep them on outside of like internal linking and the stuff that we have access to, and the ability to, I don't say gerrymander, but gerrymander. Like, what can we do? Outside of that, it's like your onboarding program. If you know somebody really always reads articles from a certain author, are you sending them push notifications when that author comes up? Like, how much do you know about, how much data do you have about your audience that will allow you to set up these things that makes their consumption of you easy? And I think that's the key bit here, and like what we know about people and why AI overviews are theoretically successful and answer engines are successful is they just make people's life easy. They don't have to do another thing. And if people don't have to do another thing, they're willing to sacrifice quality and accuracy. And that's, I mean, me included, right? That's like, we just will in lots of cases. That's all of us.
Shame, but I think you're right.
I think so.
So you're just kind of keeping on the content question then. You've both sort of mentioned about publishing on platforms you don't own. So, you know, there's been sort of newsletters and podcasts and stuff been mentioned. I just want to dig into then why this is sort of particularly important for publishing, and what does that look like in practice, you know, when you're working with one of these big brands. Harry, do you want to lead that one?
Yes. So I think I think Rand would always call this building on rented land, right? Which is 20 years ago, you got taught that was a really shitty idea and you want people to come to your website so you can monetize them. Now you kind of don't have that choice. So now what this is just marketing, right? This is just touch points. This is being where your customer is at the right time, where your user is. Like Jessie said earlier, are they on Reddit? Are they on Instagram? Are they on TikTok? What subreddits are they in? Who do they care about? Are you engaging with them in the comments? It's like the full customer ecosystem here that extends beyond traditional search, which we might not have control over or access over, but as like an audience team and a group of people who should be interested in and care about the audience and developing it and cultivating it over time, then really what this is like just being there. Because if we're not there, somebody else will be. And in a kind of passive, incidental world of the news just flies past as you're doom scrolling on the sofa, it's like you got to be there. You got to cut through the noise somehow. So you don't really have a choice in the matter anymore. For most people, it's like you have to embrace this. You have to create stuff that cuts through, and you have to be where your audiences are, even if that means sacrificing getting people coming onto your site, because you need them to see you enough. By the time they get to your site, they should be ready to convert. I think that's kind of the point with whether you're selling a product or it's a subscription, it's information. People need to come to your site with like, fuck, I really like this stuff. It's really interesting. That's where we need to get to.
And I really also like, just from a journalism perspective, like the thing that Harry said about like if you're not there, someone else is there. And if it's not your competitors, it's going to be some influencer who doesn't have the rigor that you have, that doesn't have the editorial workflows and fact-checking processes in place to make sure that their output is really good. Not that that isn't true across the board of influencers, but and not that that's even true of publishers writ large. But I think the idea of like, if you're not there, someone else will be, is a good reminder in terms of like a little bit of the urgency of doing these things and building these audiences and different platforms and places. Is a good reminder, because someone will fill this void, someone will get that visibility, and even if it's less valuable, it still is visibility. And if you're not seeing search, if you're seeing search declines and you're not doing anything about it, like it is a question of like, well, then what are we all doing here, sort of thing. But I also wanted to say on the, if you're not doing it, someone else will. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I was at ONA and there was a really great session about younger audiences and engaging with them off platform. One thing that I thought was interesting was that on Instagram, a lot of young people, what they do is they hop into the comments and use the comments as feedback to decide whether they're going to look at the video and watch the video in full and engage with that brand further. So it's a little bit of just like, you should probably be in the and I know like for years people were like, don't read the comments, don't read the comments, it's toxic sludge. But it's not necessarily, it doesn't have to be. Using like understanding how people actually engage with the content, and then making sure that you're doing that in order to be there, to show up in people's lives, to make them, to have enough touch points that eventually when they are like, to hear what Harry just said, ready to convert, like that you're the brand they think about. I think that work is sort of really essential. And even if it's not got as much return on investment as like the old model did, like I think it's just the reality that like audiences are super fragmented, and we do kind of have to put more of an effort behind showing up in a bunch of different places, whereas we used to have it a little bit easier. Although, you know, no one thought that we had it easy 10 years ago. But you know, that's hindsight. So I think like the thing that I was trying to point out about the comments piece on Instagram is just like, if that's behavior, can you do something about it to your advantage? Like, can you have your authors be in the comments, fact checking, replying, engaging in conversation, bringing back, because what that does is bring users back to that piece of content and gives you a second crack at those eyeballs, and another opportunity to engage with that people, which again, like eventually means hopefully they'll get off Instagram, go to your website, sign up for a newsletter, subscribe, open your app, all those kinds of things. But you do need those multiple touch points before you've earned someone's trust.
And so is that the role of the SEO to,
well, not necessarily.
Where does SEOs fit in?
I think it isn't necessarily SEO, but it's definitely audience, and SEO sits within audience. So I think it's just like understanding, you know, like if I Google Jason Collins, for example, what does the search results look like? The search results looks like I've got an Instagram post, I've got a link on Reddit, I've got the top stories box, and I've got Wikipedia, and I've got Basketball Reference, and I've got 1-2 publisher links. So the search results for Jason Collins should sort of be informative about what your plan for covering his passing looks like from an editorial perspective, because it's not just publisher content. And I think SEOs can say like, here are the platforms that show up most often, and here's the content that we see, or here are the creators that we see doing well on these search results. So I think it's like, it's SEO working with audience to make these things happen, but it definitely isn't just an SEO person doing this stuff. I certainly am not posting on Instagram. I'm not creating short form video content, even though like I see that content all the time on search results and like linked to search results. And I think like, hey, this is hugely valuable. I'm definitely not out there shooting 30-second Instagram videos.
No, that's not our bag. But that, well, I suppose what is our bag? That's not to undersell as an industry. I think what we've always been really good at is being super structured, analytical, clear, like creating plans. Like other departments are not particularly good at this in lots of cases. Obviously not naming any names or companies, but not everybody is that structured in this way. So the huge amount of value you can add is to go to or set up audience planning meetings or planning meetings where you try and bring people together and say, this is the event, this is the whatever it is. You can try and sit there and be like, this is what we're seeing. So you can open dialogue, and our job can't just be everything. And obviously, like nobody wants us to do that. We wouldn't do good 30-second videos, certainly not to begin with. Like, you need someone different for that in lots of cases. But that is a part of our job, and the audience team's job, as Jessie said. It's like structure, planning, figuring out what we do and when. But I think you need to alleviate as much of the stress as you can, trying to have plans in place where you will reach people where they care about stuff and when they care about stuff.
Yeah, that tempo planning, I think editors and commissioning editors and assigning editors are really good at knowing what reporters and editors think is going to be really useful and valuable from an editorial perspective. But I think SEO and audience editors are really good at having the data and the analysis and the gut instinct to know that, like, in this moment, people are going to be searching for X, and then bringing that to the table. Because, like, I can't tell you the number of times in edit meetings where we're covering a protest and no one has thought, like, are we going to have a photo gallery component to this? Because it's like, well, if I look at search results, I look at Google Trends, I see people looking for, no King's protest signs. And that is obviously an indication of a search interest for a visual element to the coverage. I mean, it's also like people want to know what funny signs there are, but that's fine. Like that's something that people are looking for. They're actively seeking out. So bringing that to the table, or for example, people always need to, the Met Gala is another great example of, like, people want to see the photo gallery, and that's something that they're searching for, and it's something that is potentially overlooked by editors who are always thinking about the story first. So I think the main thing that SEO and audience editors can do is bring that audience first perspective to the table and back it up with data.
Yeah, that makes loads of sense. Okay, so I just want to remind folks, if you have questions, to put them in the Q&A box. But I want to talk for a little bit now about paywalls. So I'm assuming pretty much everyone in the audience knows this, but just in case you don't, the two companies that our guests work for today do operate a slightly different commercial model, where the Telegraph has a paywall for a lot of the content, so you have to be a paying subscriber in order to access it, whereas the Guardian doesn't have a paywall, so the content is free and ungated. It just sort of endlessly nags you instead. So these are different commercial environments, right? So I'm kind of fascinated to dig into how that means, you have to approach things differently and how it changes your perspective. And again, it doesn't necessarily mean that you've chosen that this is one's better than the other. You just happen to work in businesses that have chosen that commercial approach. So Harry, I'll start with you. So as an SEO working inside the paywall environment, what does that force you to be exceptional sorry. And again, I'm primarily thinking about Google search, so leave AI to one side for a second. What skills matter more at the Telegraph than they would perhaps at the Guardian?
Well, I suppose you have to really understand, like, what the value of each article is in the chain of somebody reading something for the first time that you do, all the way through to actually subscribing. I suppose you've got to have a pretty clear idea about how all of your content works together. You got to be pretty good at not ranking brilliantly over time in lots of cases. And obviously, the kind of the best paywalls now, nobody or very few have a very, very hard paywall. Most people give enough away to people. So like companies like Piano will have a graded system where as you come in as a fresh user, you might be scored as 0 on the scale, which means we don't know anything about you, maybe other than your location. So you have a very low propensity to subscribe. All the way up to 9, it might be that you've read 30 articles in the last 4 days or whatever it is, and it will go, this guy's super likely to subscribe. Let's hard paywall them for the rest of the time until they do. So you have to be okay with the fact that over time you aren't going to generate the engagement signals that somebody like the Guardian might do, or somebody like completely free to air might do. So that you have to understand where you sit in the playing field. You have to be really good at reporting. You have to be good at documenting this and describing this to people, because you aren't going to be able to generate as much as somebody who's free to air is over time. It's just not feasible. So you've got to be good at managing stakeholders on that front. You've also got to be pretty good at testing stuff and knowing the value of different channels and different pieces of content. Like lots of companies will have something like sport. You can get really good sports coverage in lots of different places. It might not be a big subscription play for you, but it might be a really good retention play. Or it might be so you have to understand what each channel is doing, what types of content in the channel does. So you've got to be pretty analytical with how this works. So you could make some recommendations around to specific channels, like what you suggest to sport might be quite different for what you suggest to like travel, as an example. So I think your understanding of the wider ecosystem and you as a publisher has to be really good. And then something like, Google Discover, huge volume play. There are not many huge volume plays left, but a terrible play for subscriptions. And although you can't really accurately identify everyone that comes through Google Discover. Do you want to open that channel up as much as possible, just to say, like, look, we do need people in the system? So that's quite a good summary, I think, of how to work with, or how to understand the nuances of working with a sort of relatively hard paywall.
Yeah, that's great. So essentially the same question to you, Jessie, but like the reverse, like what, when you're working, when every article's free, what's important for you in terms of the search landscape as well, that perhaps is something that Harry would focus on less.
Yeah, I think for The Guardian, I'm going to put a link in the chat. Steve Sachs, our managing director, had an interview with the rebooting, and I think it gets at what has worked so far for Guardian US. And I would just say, like, search or not search, one thing that is really important for us as a publication, and I don't think this is giving away state secrets, but like The Guardian is distinctive. It is a very it's very distinctive. Our journalism is not like anyone else's, and that is very much intentional and on purpose. We don't cover stories in the same way that Politico might, or the New York Times might, or CNN might. Like, we've got we're distinctive. Distinctive is a word that is used often in our newsroom, because it really matters. It matters that we are different from our competitors, that we're different from other people on offer. But because even though we don't have a paywall, because it's it's a value. It's core to the Guardian value and to the Guardian brand that we're free and open to all, and we advertise, like the language on the pop-up when we ask for money is not owned by billionaires, and that's accurate. And that is partly like, we can't take too much credit for that, because like the Guardian has the trust that's set up, which gives us a very unique operating model. But I think a core value for us as SEO and audience editors at the Guardian is making sure that our distinctive is clear. We don't cover everything, but the things we do, we cover very, very well. And from the very distinctive Guardian point of view. So I would say, like, picking your lane and sticking to it and making that clear in every level is really, really important, because ultimately, like, we do ask for money, and we have to make it okay to give people a reason to give us money when they can get all of our content for free. And I think part of that is like being really distinctive, picking a lane, and making it a values proposition more than necessarily like a, because like for a publisher, for example, like when I worked at the Globe and Mail, one of the main core reasons people subscribed was business investing news. And so part of that is sort of your everyday like person who wants to know whether they're saving enough for retirement, but like tier two, the level above that is like people who need this business investing news for their jobs, and for whom they're willing to then pay for it. So that's a very like high utility business proposition, whereas like for the Guardian, it's more of a values proposition, I would say. Does that answer your question? I know that I didn't really talk about SEO, because it's just like the SEO work that we do reflects that broader distinctiveness for us.
Yeah, I guess the only the part that I'm interested around this is that, do you have the same sort of value metrics that Harry was talking about within your ecosystem, or do you not think about it in that way?
Well, we do think about loyalty a lot, and engagement time, and those two together. Like, are people coming back to a particular type of journalism we do? For example, like, Robert Wright breaks for us. So, we would, and this isn't specific to the Guardian, this would be true at many organizations and many publications, but like, if we have a big name brand author, are people coming to that from search? Like, are people actively seeking out his content, or are they consuming it passively when they get to our homepage? But yeah, we definitely use like how deeply are people reading our content as a metric for how much do they value it. But that's not specific to the Guardian. That is, I think, true as a metric across publications.
Okay, cool. Right. So then let's now think about the inevitable AI bit. Does Paywall protect you from AI summarization, or expose you to more? Like, or does it, like, being free make you more visible to AI or more disposable? I'm really interested to know how you think about AI in relation to Paywall specifically. How are you start on this one?
Does anything help? I don't know. You'd like to think it would do, but I'm not sure the paywall's been particularly helpful. I think for most publishers as well over the last 10 years, what do? You work with different people who would syndicate your content. Your content's just out there. We know that they've used Wayback Machine, like the Internet Archive, to be able to get everything. I'm not sure it does. It does in the manner of like, will people still pay for your content? I don't think anybody was paying for your content just for like rudimentary information anyway. Like, people are paying for us for content because they think it's good and it adds value to their lives and they care about it and the people writing it, which I really hope. I think Barry's talked about this before, but I really hope that we get to a point where in the near future that people become more comfortable paying for news. And obviously in the UK, like, we pay for the BBC anyway, but you don't think of it as that, but we do pay for the BBC, and we are, as a country, I think, relatively low on the percentage of people in a country who actively pay for news. But people are willing to, yeah, exactly. As Harry said, like, I think people will have to be more comfortable paying for news. Like, paywalls will only increase because there just isn't another particularly viable business model. And a pound of subscriber revenue is so much better than a pound of any other revenue because it's repeatable and it's demonstrable that your company has real value. And that can go into, if you're being audited or you're trying to sell a company, if you have that, like, a pound of advertising revenue just pales in comparison. So the paywall does protect you. I don't think it really protects you from your content being eaten by machines, to be honest. I think they're just too greedy. You block everything as best as you can, particularly training data stuff. If you have deals, then it's different. But yeah, I think it does and it doesn't, would be my way of describing it.
What's your thoughts, Jessie?
Yeah, I think if you're off, it's sort of the same, but in reverse. Like, being totally free doesn't necessarily make you, like, nothing is actually going to protect you from Google changing what they want to show in search results, I think, is the truth. Having a paywall or having a really strong revenue model, that's the thing that'll actually sustain your business long term. And I think, audience and SEO editors, yeah, we need to be separate from the business, but we can't think of ourselves as, we need to be separate from the business in that, like, we're not going to cover something because commercial wants to run an ad against it or whatever. That's sort of like age old. There still needs to be church and state, but like, we do also need to recognize that, like, part of our jobs is making sure that the organization is putting resourcing behind things that are going to sustain the business. And you can take that in like a commercial perspective, obviously, but also it's just like demonstrating value to readers is something that audience and SEO editors, I think, are instrumental for, because if we're not doing something that's better than the AI overview, why would people support us, give us their time, energy, or attention, right? So I think, I don't know that any revenue model for any publisher is going to protect them from AI overviews or AI mode, but having that sort of strategic thinking is really important.
Yeah, it's also like, obviously you want Googlebot to consume your content for search and discover, but when Google becomes mostly AI as well, it's gonna be very, very difficult. So I do actually want to dig into that, because you just mentioned it. Obviously, Barry had put it as a comment earlier, so I'm going to turn it into a question so we can talk about it. Because in a second, put it on stage, and because he actually tweeted about this, not tweeted, LinkedIn did about it about a month ago, and the full content was essentially, these are Barry's words: it's become absolutely necessary for publishers to block all bots by default, ideally at the CDN layer, and only allow access to specified bots that deliver a positive value exchange (brackets like Googlebot). Having an open crawlable website is the same as having a store without walls and doors, without security of any sort, and no repercussions for theft, because this is theft. So I just want to talk on the technical of that. Is this something that is feasible?
It's exactly what the Telegraph do, give or take, and I think it's the only option available to you. Really, you have to own your stuff. You have to protect what you have. If you're a publisher who doesn't have, who's like kind of not wanted by AI, which I appreciate is rare, but if what you do is pretty much serve commodity content that you can find elsewhere, you kind of have bigger problems anyway. So unless you can figure out a route to becoming valuable, like either way, this is what you have to do. I think you have to protect yourself. Again, the problem is doing all of this costs more money and time, but it is the only answer as far as I'm concerned to survive through this period until people will actually pay for stuff.
Jessie?
Yeah, I think that's hitting the nail on the head. But I also think, like, just to re-up Harry's what you just said about like finding the path to value, like figuring out what makes you really valuable to readers, I think is sort of like the challenge for all of us. Like if SEO can, like if search traffic continues to fall off a cliff, and specifically that commodity traffic that people relied on falls off a cliff, like what are you actually doing and how are you actually showing up for people in their lives? Like Barry Barry in his zero click post, I think alluded to the fact that like a lot of publications are really going to struggle and probably some publications are going to die. Obviously that's sad from just like a journalism perspective. Like I think having fewer journalists writing and publishing content is bad. I think period, end of point. And having fewer journalists employed at sites, whether you're doing commodity content that yes you can find elsewhere, but I do think that like having fewer journalists in the ecosystem is a net negative. That said, having newsrooms that are really clear on what value they deliver to readers, I think is a net positive. So it's sort of the balance between those two things of like everything is just getting harder to do, reaching people is just getting harder, but it is sort of like the reality that we face. Hair, Barry, bald. It's
other way around.
Sorry, no. Sorry, I got distracted. And then Barry's comment here: bundle subscriptions would be popular. I think that yeah, that's a good one too. Where it's like, yeah. Sorry, I got off track, but yes, I got distracted by the hair Barry, bald Barry comment. Just yeah, the path to value, I think, is the thing to take away and go next on. And then listen to whatever Barry says about the technical implications and recommendations. And I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Right, I think we've got time for, there's one more question in here. I'll just put it on. So, okay, back on the paywalls then. So by paywalling, don't you sacrifice reference links from AI conversations? When you spend a lot of time in conversations with AI, you click through to resources when required. So wouldn't paywalling remove that channel? Nor do you care?
I can't see the bottom of the question, but yeah, no, these things are just not built to send any referral traffic. They are designed. If you think about why Google was a good value exchange was because there was an obvious value exchange in like, we will organize the world's information and we will make it easier for you to find the good stuff. Like broadly that work. What these guys have done is organize the world's information in a different way so they don't have to send you anywhere, so they can answer it. So I think what paywalling does basically is it does reduce the amount of engagement and shares and links you get. It does reduce your reach, but it gives you more value as a business. None of this stuff matters outside of making money for your business broadly. So I wouldn't frame it in that way. And also, actually, we don't really know that much about how each of these individual fucking LLM site stuff. So it's like, no, yeah, I almost wouldn't worry about that. I would really focus on like, how do you just create something that you can paywall that people will pay for, and kind of don't worry about the rest.
Totally.
Yeah, Kevin Indig had that piece about, or it was either Kevin or Rand, and they had a survey that was like, we asked the same prompt 1,000 times and got 1,000 different answers. I'll find the link and put it in the chat. But I think to Harry's earlier point, like the money that you get from reader revenue, which is what we call it at The Guardian, or the money that you get from a paywall is just more valuable. It's more consistent. It's a sign of loyalty. It's people putting up their hand and say, I value what you do and I want to support it. And that is an active interest in comparison to, getting 1 million page views to a story and getting advertising revenue trickle in. So I think it's just like your paywall is going to drive more sustainable revenue, or your reader revenue model is going to drive more sustainable revenue. That's going to keep the lights on long term.
Amazing. Okay, well, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks everyone for watching, and huge thanks, of course, to Jessie and Harry for so generously giving it the time and expertise today. We will be emailing out the recording tomorrow, so everyone who registered. So if you missed the start, don't worry, you can catch up. And we'll be back again in June for our next webinar, which is about building websites so they are accessible to AI agents. So keep an eye on your inboxes for details of that one. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thank you, guys.
Bye. Have a good day.
Bye.